Long Island Backstory with Chief Correspondent Gary Jacobs.
Good evening, I'm Gary Jacobs, and welcome to another edition of Long Island Backstory, where we're filming at the Alt-T Studios in Hauppauge, New York. Today we're going to talk about gun control and the issues that lead up to gun violence and all these school shootings from a different perspective. In a previous show, we had a New York City police officer talking about his perspective and the constitutional rights, but my guest today is going to talk about the effects of psychotropic drugs and how that leads to a lot of these problems. My guest today is a friend of mine who was gracious enough to decide to come on the show and talk about this issue today. Dorothy Hill is a graduate of Dartmouth College and has an MBA from NYU Stern School of Business with a double major in finance and technology. She's a global financial services advisor and consultant, including FinTech, RegTech, anti-fraud, corruption, money laundering, financial crime investigations, best practices in cybersecurity. So if anybody in the future is going to be dating Miss Hill, you better be careful what you put on your computer, because she's going to figure it out. A former McKinsey consultant based in Europe, she worked for Goldman Sachs for 6 years in Germany, Switzerland, Japan, Hong Kong, France, and the UK. Miss Hill is fluent in French and German, and is a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners Long Island chapter. She has resided with her family on Long Island since 2007. She serves on the board of Dartmouth Club of NYC and has been an active alumni interviewer of applications to the college from New York City and Long Island for over a decade. On today's show, Ms. Hill will expose the role of psychotropic drugs in many of these young men that are involved in mass shootings and having been in the care of the Department of Social Services and CPS with little or no mental health care services, as well as unresolved anger and rage issues. So that's a lot of stuff there. But listen, you're a smart woman, so you know all about this. So let's start at the beginning, which is what I asked the next guest, because if you look on Facebook, there are some people who would say we don't have a problem with gun violence. It's just more public than it used to be. It's in the news more. We have a big population, and percentage-wise, it's not really a problem. So let's start off with that. Do you believe that we have a problem with gun violence in America?
We most definitely have a problem with gun violence. However, it's one of various classes of homicide. For example, vehicular homicide, homicide by strangulation, homicide by knife, and also even homicide by intentional overdose. So obviously premeditated homicide. If we go back to the 1800s, I don't know if you've ever taken a tour of San Francisco, for example, but you'll take a tour and you'll learn about certain killers who targeted young women or young women who were living in hostels or practically homeless. So again, yes, media has helped to escalate this. The school shootings is definitely a new phenomenon.
And the mass shootings, because back then there wasn't these major killing machines, so yes, somebody can go around and shoot one person, two person, even three people, which is horrible too.
Yes.
But I don't think that we had these mass shootings that we have now.
That's correct. And schools are considered safe places to go. For example, a shopping mall, or to be in your church or synagogue or other house of worship. So absolutely, it's a confined space. But I'm here today to talk about the specific individuals, what is going on in their respective families and their background, and obviously the psychological issues that lead to that.
Right. So that my next question was, what do you attribute it to? And from your perspective, a lot of this, I'm sure it's not the only thing, but a lot of it is the family and these involvements with social services, the courts, and psychotropic drugs. So let's start at the beginning. What role? And I Googled it after we spoke, and it's just unbelievable the percentage of these young men who were on, even not only young, all the mass murderers who were on psychotropic drugs or were just taken off of it, but at some point in their life were on these. In fact, I read on one of the sites that there's 325 million people are on some type of, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported in 2011, which is probably a lot higher now, that 11% of Americans aged 12 and up are taking antidepressant medications, with 323 million Americans, that's 35 million people. And it says even if only 1 in 10,000 of these users experiences the most severe symptoms, we're looking at 1,000 psychotropic, hysterical, delusional, or homicidal people.
Well, I don't doubt the percentage, but someone being on antidepressants doesn't necessarily translate into suicide ideation and/or homicidal tendencies. Absolutely, it's definitely a more complex, holistic approach that we have to take as a society, and in my view, we have not done so. We're a society where people want the quick fix, right? It's the quick gratification. And certainly, social media has contributed to that. Sort of the narcissist look at me, how many likes do I have, and also the real-time response that kids get when he or she is not invited to a party, and the emotional impact of that. But absolutely, in terms of statistics, those numbers do not surprise me. I haven't seen the most recent numbers, but again, it also could be a temporary situation. Many teenagers going through difficult times. We all know that the teenage years are challenging.
Years, right?
Challenging. They're particularly
for parents and kids.
Yeah, exactly. And now think about the pressure. The pressure cooker of what needing to go to a top university, or the pressure of sports in particular. And then, like I said before, the immediate social media impact, as well as to a great extent the celebrity mentality of the materialism of children feeling insecure, and young adults as well. It's not just children from age 12 upward. It's often adults as well who are impacted in an adverse way by the social media.
Right. So what role do these drugs play, if any, in these mass murders and school shootings?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, because of HIPAA laws, we as public are not necessarily privy to the specific prescriptions they have taken, or the cocktail, I'd say, of various prescriptions. And I'll give you the example of Adam Lanza. His particular alleged doctor, who lived in Maine for a while, was not cooperating with authorities, and then all of a sudden Adam Lanza's medical records were released. I always question that, because we, again, are not privy. Even if the FBI were to obtain those psychiatric records and records of doctor visits and the doctor's notes, it's highly unlikely that a doctor or psychologist would turn those over, even to the court.
Right.
Correct.
Right. So we're just doing this sort of from what we hear from family members, and the rumors, the press get stuff leaked out. But do you believe that a lot of the statistics that we hear, and that almost all these kids are on some type of drug?
Again, I cannot attest to that, because I am not the FBI agent who would have looked at those records. But again, if we look at the school shootings, for example, Parkland, the alleged shooter, and I will say that only because at Building 12 there was video shot of men removing some item with a large duffel bag, and for some odd reason the FBI never carried forward on that investigation. But that individual is actually from Long Island. He grew up on Long Island. His mother and father were here. He was adopted, and then a very sad set of circumstances. His father died here on Long Island. I think actually the funeral was in close to my home. I read that. And then the mother moved to Florida, to Parkland, to live close to other relatives. And that student went to that school. However, the psychological basis of many of these young men is one of, in many cases, antisocial personality, also oppositional conduct disorder, which in the book is called ODD. Some of them have ADHD. ADHD, attention deficit disorder, is not necessarily part of the mix. But if you look at the antisocial personalities and the fact that many of these young men were playing video games, violent video games, didn't have a very strong network of friends, were often perceived by other students as being loners, may have had difficulty communicating their feelings to a family member. Bottom line is they did not have the social support and the type of counseling, like a peer-to-peer network, that many of our high schools here on Long Island offer to students starting in the middle school or high school. So those are some of the common factors among these school shooters.
Right. So, we talk about the video games. So what can be done about this? I mean, do we outlaw violent video games? I mean, there's already warnings on these things, and most parents know that the kids are playing violent video games. But all their friends are playing them. They're going to be a mean parent if your kid won't be popular if he can't get on and play all these killing games. So what do we do about this? This is like just part of our society now. these violent video games? Do you think they should be outlawed, or more limited? What is it that we can do?
Well, I don't think that they're going to go away. We had, Centipede and Pac-Man. The difference, as I often discuss, is, is myself against, Pac-Man. I wanted to attain a higher score. It was not to hurt someone. I don't get points by, absorbing or eating a certain object. Now it's very different, as you mentioned.
Right, much different.
It's interactive. The incentives that are set involve, some cases, rape. We look at how many of these video games are highly misogynist. The killing aspect, also the international. I noticed with one family member who's a young male, I noticed, why are all these characters speaking with a Russian accent? Obviously the coders who write these games will often, introduce those factors. The bottom line, in Russians, I have many Russian friends, so that being said, having lived around the globe, of course, but the bottom line is that A, they're not going away. B, we may need a more transparent rating system. We definitely need education, but also it's training for parents. A certain amount of time per day or per week, or simply a rule that some parents have instituted is no Xbox or video game of that type in our household. But the issue is as these teenagers get older, and like you said, their friends are playing the games, the teenagers will say, well, I'm going to Joey's house. So what is the parent going to do? Go over to Joey's house, knock on the door, and say, Simon, it's time to come home. So it's reality. So it's really up to the parent or parents or caregivers of these children to educate them. But again, peer pressure is intense. They don't want to be left behind. They talk about the games the next day. They talk about their scores on social media. It's definitely an issue, not just in the United States, but around the globe as well.
What role do you feel that the family courts play, if any, in raising violent children?
Yeah, so this is something I know a lot about. So in Nassau County in particular, I can attest to the fact that many of the Nassau County judges are certainly not well educated about domestic violence, about the dangers of addiction to video games. So for example, when a judge reads a forensic psychologist report of a teenage boy, for example, because that judge may not have the training, it's glossed over. And so also judges are not analyzing the issues within a family structure in a deeply detailed and holistic or multidisciplinary way. Think about how many cases they have coming through. I've gone before a judge on a particular case, and she didn't even remember that I had testified 2 years prior on a money laundering on a major money laundering investigation case. So that just shows you that these judges have many cases. I do think they're overwhelmed, and lastly, they do not have the proper training.
And they shouldn't be. They're lawyers. They're not psychologists.
True.
So they should be using psychologists. But unfortunately, for what I've seen, the people that they bring in are only a little bit more educated. I mean, for example, you mentioned social services, and I said that in my introduction because we spoke about that. A lot of times you have social workers with 2-year degrees making decisions on families like that affecting children's lives, and they have almost the least amount of experience to be doing this. What have you had any experience with social services and them getting involved, and what is their responsibility in all of this?
Sure, absolutely. So over the last 5 or 6 years, I've court watched on different cases in both Suffolk County and Nassau County, so both of our counties here on Long Island, and I've observed that the judges are not necessarily fair. Also, I've observed that, yes, Department of Social Services, and CPS in particular, they have much too much power. They can make a decision about a child's future, even without a judge's consent or signature. It's actually shocking.
It's
scary. It's shocking. It's scary. It actually can break up a family and destroy a family based on the fact that they're not upholding the U.S. Constitution, and there are many civil rights violations. But in terms of CPS, yes, many of these CPS workers are young. They don't have the type of life experience. Many of them not even parents themselves. I'm not saying that a CPS worker has to be a parent to understand, but it certainly gives you
a 23-year-old person making like you said, life decisions, and really could be destroying lives.
Yes, and I say it's not just one person who makes a decision that a child is removed from a home. It's a group decision. However, the supervisor takes the inputs from CPS reports that are called in. That's another issue. More than 50 or 60% of CPS calls that are made are retaliatory in nature in New York State. We trace some of these calls to Albany, to the main center where the calls come in, and we spoke to Verizon, and they said because of the laws they could not disclose the phone number or the source. People use VPNs.
Dorothy, I would think higher. Honestly, from what I've seen, there's a huge amount of people.
That could vary a little bit.
I mean, you have people who've been, years together, all of a sudden they're in a divorce, and there's anonymous calls coming from all over the place that were never there before.
Yeah,
and you have to say, well, did the person wake up and become a child abuser the next day? I think I really think it's higher.
It could very well be higher, and in divorce.
Well, in Long Island, because the courts like this. They listen to it. It's not like they would say, hey, listen, we take it with a grain of salt. Here, they take this very seriously. It is a major way to get an upper hand in the courts here. It's not discouraged, in my opinion.
Right.
It's not discouraged here whatsoever. Hey, we'll play along. You want to feed money into the system and call CPS, we'll entertain it, we'll separate, we'll order a protection, but they really don't do anything to fix the problem.
Correct.
Listen, if you believe there's a problem, well, do something about it.
Yes.
Where's the therapy? What is it? Okay, separate. Well, the
Exactly.
problem doesn't go away if you believe someone's a child abuser. Well, do something about it. And what happens to the victim?
Right.
Oftentimes I see kids, well, you have an order of protection. You can't go near this person. Okay, are you going to do something about it?
Right.
If you really believe there's a problem,
right.
The kids should be getting therapy. The parents should be getting therapy with the goal to reunify them with the child. Because I believe that the kids need both parents.
Yes.
And it'd be great if they're healthy parents.
Yes, of course.
And we should work towards that goal. But
Yes.
here they don't.
Right,
in
and also
Long Island.
right, high conflict divorces. They're often stretched out. Even a short-term marriage of 3 years can take 3-5 years to get through the system.
Not uncommon.
Often is.
Especially if there's money.
Exactly. That's what I was just about to say. When there's money involved, and think about all the people who are making money in this system. Judges are well paid here on Long Island. The court appointed or what they call the guardian ad litem for the children, the psychologists and others. They drag it out. And many people think, well, the judge operates on this silo and CPS on this silo. Absolutely not.
No, they're on the same
is
team.
a well-oiled machine, and I can give you one case after another where that is true. How does this tie back to sort of the school shootings and psychotropic drugs? What happens is some of the children, if they're removed from the family without a proper evidence-based forensic investigation, can easily end up in foster care. So instead of looking at that child's past, trauma, interviewing all of the family members in person, not just by phone, because remember, people can also be on the phone and pretend to be someone else. Mm-hmm. So again, this would never be done by should not be done by NYPD on a proper investigation. This is criminal in nature, taking a child from his or her home based on that. So what happens is the children are placed, for example, in if they're not in a shelter, in a foster home or some type of nonprofit, like we have Mercy First, there's Timothy Hill Children's Ranch out in Riverhead, and again, the quick fix is to place a child on psychotropic drugs. For example, for insomnia. Have you ever heard of a child with insomnia prescribed Seroquel? I've heard about that. That's a highly dangerous psychotropic drug which should never be prescribed to teenagers or young men in particular. We all know about the teenage brain, takes longer to develop. The synapses, it's really not until 24, 25 if you look at a young male.
And do we even know long term what the results are of giving kids these medications?
We don't know. AstraZeneca, which is the manufacturer, please don't come after me. I just using Seroquel as an example. There have been lawsuits against AstraZeneca, and again, to your point, we do not know the long-term effects of psychotropic drugs on the human brain. And again, because it's really been a big force and multi-billion-dollar industry. And again, I worked on Wall Street, so I worked on some of these major, big pharma mergers while at Goldman Sachs and other firms. But the bottom line is, yes, we do not have the result. We don't have any type of long-term testing that's done or disclosures to the parents and or caregivers about suicide ideation. We sometimes hear the disclosures, but we often ask two main questions when it comes to these school shooters and the effect of psychotropic drugs. Number one, why are these school shooters primarily male? That's one.
Good question.
Right? What's going on with the girls is because the girls, the way they socialize and they turn to each other, I want to meet you and talk, versus the way that we raise, the way that males are socialized in our society. It's I'd rather play a video game and get out my frustration than to go shoot hoops with Joey and talk about how my mother's kind of a pain because she's telling me to be home by 11. I want to be home by 1. Just as an example, that's one, the male versus the female shooter. The other one is, why aren't we delving into, again, the roots of the anger, frustration, and also looking at natural remedies? So instead of Seroquel, why not prescribe, for example, like a lavender or some type of—
there's no money in it.
Bingo. And the holistic doctors, we all know, if you go and start researching holistic doctors, and when they speak out in public, it's often not a happy ending.
You hear all the time how they get blackballed, and they shoot them down, and one lone guy going up against $1 billion drug company, they're going to destroy him in court a couple times.
Yes.
And I believe that the courts are on their side, on the big money side. They're not on the side of, let's do the right thing for the kid. I mean, as you've been in court many times, they say the best interest of the child. I think that's anything furthest from the truth. It's best interest of the pocketbook. So what about the gun laws? Do you think that stricter gun laws would help this?
Well, we're already seeing changes to our gun laws state by state. Certainly, the Second Amendment is not going away, in my opinion. And I come from Boston and from a long line of U.S. patriots going back to the Revolutionary War, like sons and daughters of the American Revolution. So I come to this issue probably from a different vantage point. However, I am tracking many of the legislative changes going on around the country in terms of more detailed background checks, in particular, mental health. However, as one of my favorite memes shows, if we were to change the gun laws such that people would not have access to guns, who ends up owning the guns?
Right.
The law enforcement and the criminals. So even if you have a town population 50,000 and let's say the gun ownership decreases by say 60% of valid gun owners, we're still going to have organized crime. We're still going to have drugs trafficking, sex trafficking, and all of those types of what the feds call OC, organized crime. Those will continue.
Right. So what role do we hold the drug companies responsible? I mean, we went back to the drug. This is a big part of the problem. Maybe that's why so many years ago we didn't have also people weren't divorced as much, which I have to think that plays a role. I think only one of the last shooters came from an intact family. So there's got to, like you said, there's something.
Yes.
There's a reason that there's boys and not girls. There's got to be a reason why their kids are only 50% of families are divorced, or 60%, right?
Yes.
So that should be the statistic, but it's nearly 100% are people from divorced families. So I think that's part of it, which I don't think there's anything we're going to change about that. People are going to get divorced, but we could change the court system by educating the judges and the lawyers, maybe go to a more shared parenting and encourage families to stay together, encourage mental health, instead of doing the drugs. The quick fix is everything that's wrong, let's give drugs. The parents are depressed because they're going through the divorce, let's give them antidepressant. The kid's got ADHD, let's give him something for the ADHD. Now the kid can't sleep at night because of the ADHD medicine. Let's give him something to help him sleep at night. Who knows what all these interactions are doing to the inside the brain. I mean, obviously anybody goes in and shoots kids or shoots anybody, besides, somebody mad at a spouse and does it, a crime of passion. You have to have something wrong in your head.
Yes.
To shoot an innocent person.
Right.
I mean, not that anybody should shoot anybody, but it's one thing to shoot somebody you're angry at. To me, that's different than walking into a room and shooting and have total disregard for life. And I think that's a big part of it. People just are losing respect for life. And others. So, so really the laws, I don't know if they're going to help. So, maybe laws as far as mental health, can make a difference.
I think it's a slippery slope. I really do. The court system, it just underlies that point, that without a truly massive transformation of our mental health system in the United States, starting obviously, with giving the families the support they need, like you said, the divorce rate. Who can afford it?
The insurance isn't covered a lot of it.
That's true.
Now, and I think that's all. Everyone used to have insurance. And
Yes.
the insurance covered mental health. Now, how many millions of Americans don't have health insurance? And the ones that do, it's not covered by mental health. And I think aren't the deductibles usually so high too? It's like discouraged. So I think that's a big part of the problem too, is the mental health.
Yes, and the social anxiety that often arises with these children in elementary school, the signs start to appear. Teachers are not necessarily well trained in it. Schools, public schools, parochial schools, and other schools don't necessarily have the mental health counselors and the training. So there it goes back again to the peer-to-peer. I do believe, and I have full faith in the next generation of students to help each other. So possibly, perhaps we need federal legislation to institute peer-to-peer support and train the kids, right? Almost like train the trainers. So as they get older and they get into college and other post-high school settings, they're more aware. So for example, workplace violence, say, well, Susan over there, has been, coming in late. She's not participating in meetings like she used to. To be able to reach out in a supportive way, not an accusatory way. But in terms of the school shooters, yes, there are many signs that they actually posted their intentions on social media before the event. Second, they have many times planned suicide or suicide ideation. It's a short jump from suicide ideation in these cases, not all cases, to homicidal, because they say, well, I'm going to go out. If I'm going to go out and have a police officer shoot me, then everyone's going to know my name, and I don't really care about Mr. Joe Football over there, who's always been bullying me with no one on the school staff to have done anything about it, because basically, I'm going to show them. So it's that mentality, again, where there are many red flags that could be picked up by fellow students, by family members, by school staff, by school counselors, and we need to work collaboratively to stop this.
Great. Dorothy, thank you very much for coming on. You got a lot of wealth of information there. I'm Gary Jacobs. Thank you for watching us, Long Island Backstory. If you're watching us on YouTube, please click the subscribe button on the bottom of the screen and the bell if you'd like to be notified. If you're watching us on TV, please go to the Facebook page, Long Island Backstory, like it, and YouTube as well. You'll be notified every time we have a show. We'll see everybody next week. Thank you.
Long Island Backstory is made possible in part by Americans for Legal Reform, the oldest, most successful legal group in the world. P.O. Box 2679, Huntington Station, New York 11746. Telephone 631-421-6390. Website Americans4legalreform.com.